CIQ lends a hand, a cautionary Cisco tale, Oracle heats up databases, OpenSSH issues, again, Google's not so unlimited power, Nokia now with lasers, and a closer look at CHIPS Act training in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown for July 3rd, 2024, and happy Independence Day Eve to everyone out there. Don't forget to leave out hot dogs and beer for Uncle Sam when he stops by your house to blow things up later. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and I'm very proud to be joined by my co-host and everyone's favorite macadamia nut, Stephen Foskett. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tom. I believe that it's pronounced GIF. So I also would like to remind everybody that today is American Redneck Day, where you blow up your hand using fireworks. No, that's tomorrow. And it's also National Independent Beer Run Day, which I heartily endorse. Go get yourself some decent independent beer before the Independence Day holiday, parentheses, where you celebrate.
Absolutely. And while you're on your beer run, make sure you check out some of these news stories that we've rounded up for you because, it's been an interesting week in the news. Starting off with a story we actually talked about last week, which was SUSE's Liberty Linux Lite, which offers a lifeline for people who were running CentOS 7. That was something that I talked about. But there's another alternative, and that's Rocky Linux, because this week we talked to CIQ about Rocky Linux Bridge, which does pretty much the same thing, but there is a twist for enterprise users. CIQ offers a site license that will help customers migrate to a future-proof version of enterprise Linux. Stephen, you were the one who really jumped in on this and had a chat with CIQ. Tell us a little bit more about what CIQ Bridge for CentOS does.
Sure. Well, it is similar to what we heard about SUSE's Liberty Linux Lite, in that basically you CentOS 7 users can put in a different repository and continue to get patches and updates to software beyond the end of life, which was last Sunday. So it was a real interesting conversation that I had with the Greg Kersler from CIQ, because frankly, this is a problem for the industry. I mean, essentially what we're looking at here is technical debt. As many of us know, we build servers, we build solutions on top of operating systems. It's really hard to migrate those operating systems forward. Now, some people like to say that it's easier if you're using Ubuntu or Debian-based distro, but frankly, it's always a challenge to migrate to a new version, a new major release of any kind of operating system. And that's especially true of CentOS. So there are literally millions of CentOS 7 machines out there that are no longer receiving support updates and absolutely must receive support updates. This includes security updates. It also includes fixes for other problems that can crop up. But of course, the real answer is to migrate to another supported Unix operating system. The problem is it's difficult to make that jump. Now, Red Hat, when they changed their approach, let's say, to CentOS, I think hoped that people would make that jump to Red Hat by now. They didn't seem to do that. So what are we going to do? Well, the news here is that hyperscalers are starting to tell customers, look, if you're running CentOS, you need to migrate to something. Google Cloud is telling customers, if you're using CentOS 7, then you ought to look into CIQ's bridge, the Rocky Linux bridge, as a way to keep getting support updates and security patches and so on, because you need to have that. As we're going to talk about later on the show here, there are security bugs constantly being discovered, and those can affect servers, especially servers running older software, pretty badly. So CIQ has essentially this bridge to the future. They let CentOS 7 continue to operate. In fact, they'll offer extended support for 3 more years to people using CentOS 7. If you jump on this, which you ought to if you're relying on CentOS 7, if you jump on this, please kick off a transition process, a migration process to get onto a supported version of Linux, whether you switch distros or whether you go to one of the enterprise Linux offshoots, whether you could go to Red Hat, absolutely. You could go to Rocky Linux. You can go with Oracle, with SUSE, whoever you want to, but you got to go somewhere. And as we discussed in this conversation, the other thing that CIQ is doing here is they're helping customers make that transition. So they're basically, once a customer signs up for this Linux bridge, CIQ is there to give them some advice, to give them some help on moving forward. And if they need a lot of help, CIQ is there to help them make that migration. Now, I'm sure that they hope that they'll migrate to Rocky Linux, but they reassured me that that's not what this is all about. They're really trying to help customers to have a supported Linux environment and to migrate basically to anything supported. I applaud them for doing this. And again, I hope that those of you who are still using CentOS out there are going to take their advice and move forward with a bridge to get continuing support and move forward with a plan to get on a supported version of Enterprise Linux. The latest report from CyberRatings has Cisco firewalls labeled cautionary. That's because the independent testing firm rated the Cisco Firepower Threat Defense product with a caution marking, the only one to receive it. According to this report, it's because the system had low protection rate and specifically struggled with encrypted traffic analysis and evasion technologies. Cisco denies submitting a firewall to CyberRatings for testing, even though the CEO of CyberRatings says that he'd be happy to provide the model number and software revision. Tom, what's going on here? And should Cisco Enterprise Firewall users be concerned?
No, I don't think they should. And the reason why is buried in the story where Cisco gives their usual quote about these things. We love to work with our customers and partners to help, tune these devices to be more effective. There was this wonderful blog post that our friend Sam Clemens wrote several years ago called Drag Racing School Buses, where testing firms love to do this thing where they refuse to talk to anybody that works at the organization, and they just unbox things and turn them on and test them as they exist. And for example, if you ever wondered why access points are configured for super wide channels straight out of the box, that's why. Because no one will go in and reconfigure anything other than to get it working. They won't touch any of the systems in there. And so that's kind of what happened here, is that all of the firewalls that were tested in this report, they all did swimmingly well because everything was turned on by default. You know what I didn't see in there, though? What license level did they buy for those firewalls? Because I know that some of the stuff that a lot of these companies are starting to sell, like encrypted traffic analysis and other things, those typically don't come with a base level of licensing. And in order to get an advanced level of licensing, you usually have to talk to the company anyway. Unless some of those firewall manufacturers were including some of the tested features in the base level of licensing, specifically because they're being tested. I mean, no company would ever configure something to beat a benchmark, right? Right, Samsung? Oh, wait, yeah, that's right. I forgot. We still do that. So this is kind of one of those weird things where would we have cared about this report if someone hadn't marked Cisco as a cautionary thing? I'd be like marking Palo Alto as not meeting requirements. And then in the thing, you go, well, it actually did everything we wanted it to do, but they missed this one little checkbox. And because of that, we had to mark them as not making requirements. Did you do it because they actually didn't meet the requirements, or did you do it because you wanted your report to show up everywhere? That the news media wanted to, say, oh my God, they said that Palo Alto firewalls don't work. No, that's not what they said. So I think that this is a little bit of them wanting to kind of, jump in the news cycle a little bit. I think it's also a fact that Cisco's kind of just standing by what they say. And let's be fair, firepower threat defense is not the hottest firewall technology out there on the market. I also thought it was interesting that the CEO of the firm basically said, you should take out your firepower devices and replace them with any of the other ones that we tested in this thing. Yeah, that's not going to happen. I think what's going to occur is that Cisco is going to want to contact their companies that have purchased from them. They're going to want to reassure them that these things work perfectly fine and make sure you're on the latest code, and maybe even we'll throw you a bone about some of these encrypted traffic analytics solutions, or we're going to improve their throughput, because actually in the report it did say Cisco actually did a fairly good job of blocking a lot of common attacks, Where they started falling off was in evasion tactics. You know, things that people do to avoid being detected by firewalls. It's almost like they're getting downgraded for things that are specifically designed to address the way that they do stuff. This is the problem we have with a lot of testing things, is that sometimes people get marked down for things that they shouldn't get marked down for, and a lot of times people get credit for things that don't really matter. And that's why you really have to break these things down and read these reports, or use a trusted testing firm that just doesn't kind of pop up out of nowhere on your radar every once in a while. Who knows? Stephen, it's been a really tough week when it comes to weather, and as if it wasn't hot enough, Oracle has decided to start their own HeatWave. The GenAI focused solution is all about databases with automated in-database vector stores, scale-out vector processing, and the ability to create context for conversations from unstructured content. The goal is to help Oracle customers build GenAI applications without the need to move data all over the place, while also increasing performance over 20x compared to competing solutions from our friends over at Amazon. For a look at what this means for the market, let's go now to Futurum Group's Ron Westfall for more.
Thank you. I see Oracle HeatWave Gen AI is enabling customers to build generative AI applications without having to do data movement or requiring AI expertise, and also saving costs. And I think that's very important. I see that the solution's new capabilities, such as in-database LLMs, large language models, and customers being able to bring Gen AI to their enterprise data without necessitating moving data to a separate vector database represents a breakthrough in terms of in-memory query engine technology capabilities. Plus, through HeatWave Gen AI, I see that developers can now create a vector store for enterprise unstructured content with a single SQL command. So that's an important takeaway. It's really streamlining how developers and other users can really optimize, their ability to use the data, but also to have it improve, very important business outcomes. And this is done by using built-in embedding models. This way, users can perform natural language searches in a single step, using either in-database or external LLMs. So naturally still gives the users the choice as to how they want to use the LLMs. But the most important thing is that data does not leave the database, and there is no requirement to provision GPUs because HeatWave's scale and performance takes care of that inherently. As such, I'm seeing that developers can reduce the application development complexity, improve performance, strengthen data security, and also, very importantly, reduce costs. Now, how is this done? I think there are some important highlights about the announcement. That is the HeatWave Gen AI offering. And that is, again, the in-database LLMs. This is strengthening the development of Gen AI applications at a lower cost on an out-of-box basis. So it's ready to go. And that, I think, is going to catalyze adoption of the capability. Also, that means customers can avoid the complications of external LLM selection and integration alongside avoiding uncertainty. And I think this is something that gets overlooked. The availability of LLMs in various cloud providers' data centers. So this gives really peace of mind. It's all built in. It's all ready to go. It's a full stack. Also, it allows automated in-database vector store capabilities. In other words, users can use Gen AI with their business documents without moving data to a separate vector database and without, again, needing AI expertise. So basically, it's the man on the street who can almost use this. But seriously, this means that any employee, any member of the workforce would have the ability to have a positive impact in terms of focusing on the things that can improve business outcomes and not having to worry about the intricacies of making sure that SQL commands can actually align with the in-house data. Another neat thing, I think, is the HeatWave chat. This is basically the graphical interface for HeatWave Gen AI. It enables developers to ask questions in natural language or SQL. So again, that flexibility is there. I anticipate that there will be a lot more natural language queries on the horizon. And I think that's common sense and something that we're seeing across the industry. And again, databases or cloud database capabilities are no exception. Next is the scale out vector processing capabilities. This can deliver semantic search results without loss of accuracy. And I find that HeatWave support of new native vector data alongside an optimized implementation of the distance functions enables users to perform these semantic queries with standard SQL. So again, it's keeping it simple, it's keeping it intuitive. And this is, I think, going to have a big impact. But underlining all this, basically, why HeatWave GenAI is the question, is that I believe it's going to deliver very advantageous price performance benefits. And that is, if you're looking at how vector processing needs to be done right, what we're seeing is that Oracle's delivering a offering that is clearly competitively advantageous. And that is, Oracle can deliver 30 times faster than Snowflake, 18 times faster than Google BigQuery, and 15 times faster than Databricks at up to 6 times the lower cost. So that is, very impressive. What's not to like? And this is important, based on benchmarks. And this is something that Oracle has done consistently. Every time they've come out with a new HeatWave offering, for example, they've come out and say, hey, look, here are price performance comparisons based on benchmarks that anybody can use, that anybody can check out, and thus, help make your own determination. And so I think this is something that's going to help fuel the adoption of HeatWave GenAI capabilities. And this is another important aspect, is that it's something that could be used across the Oracle portfolio. It's not limited to, say, one database offering. It's something that any user can implement as long as they have Oracle products that can use HeatWave GenAI. And so basically, I think the key takeaway is not only these new capabilities, but also that Oracle is injecting a new competitive dynamic here. That is, why is GenAI going to have a huge impact across the enterprise space? Well, it's offerings like these that are going to basically be a game changer of sorts, and definitely, I think, make a difference in terms of how enterprises can indeed improve the workforce experience, the customer experience, and again, improve business outcomes. And with that, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot for that perspective, Ron. It's Retro Day here on the Rundown, so we're bringing back an OpenSSH bug in the wild. Well, we're not bringing it back, but this exploit, which was patched back in 2006, was reintroduced by someone in 2020, and it allows for attackers to execute arbitrary code on target systems with no need to authenticate. The exploit has been named regression, regress SSH, by Qualys, the research company that discovered it. Security analysts are suggesting that this definitely does not need to be patched, though, because it's not likely to be executed in the wild due to some very interesting technical factors. Tom, tell us a little bit about the bug and why we shouldn't be worried in a frickin' SSH bug that allows you to remotely execute as root.
Well, here's the funny thing. First of all, anybody who ever asks how do bugs just reappear? They reopened a 14-year-old bug on this thing. So bravo to that. This is what happens when you get really weird complications that go back and forth. Basically, what's happening is there was a bug in glibc that they kind of tripped over, and it allows you to do arbitrary code injection into memory spaces. But it takes a little bit of doing to make it happen, because you can't just do it from a single connection. You basically have to run this arbitrary code, and then guess what's being stored in a memory location. And that's where the problem falls apart. So if you read the article, they're like, this is absolutely a problem for 32-bit architectures because of the amount of memory addresses that you can guess at. Do you still run a 32-bit operating system? Because I know I don't, and I don't know a lot of people that still do. And the amount of memory addresses in a 64-bit operating system effectively make this impossible to exploit. You are literally playing the lottery every time you try to hit one of these. Not only that, But when you look at all of the defenses that we've developed over the last 18 years to prevent these kinds of things from happening, this makes it a functional like museum piece. Let me give you an example why. On top of the fact that we have such a massive amount of memory addresses in a 64-bit operating system that we have to guess at, there are actually randomization algorithms that prevent people from guessing like sequential memory spacing. Like there's a feature in your operating system that will purposefully randomize where things are being stored in memory to prevent people from doing things like this. So that's step one. Remember how I told you that you can't, like, you have to connect and then guess, and then if you guess wrong, you disconnect and have to connect again? Yeah, is there any kind of security feature that prevents people from making a lot of connections to a server in a short amount of time and transmitting small amounts of data and then disconnecting? Oh, yeah, we call it DDoS protection. Like all of the things that we have developed over the last almost, 15, 16, 17 years are all purpose built to stop problems like this from happening in the first place. Like this is an issue that feels big on the surface, but once you get into the technical details of it, no one will ever be able to exploit this. And if they are, I'm taking them to Vegas because we're going to play blackjack and go pull some slot machine handles because they are the luckiest person on the planet. So yes, do not rush out to patch this. This is not going to waste your July 4th. What you should do is you should have a plan to make sure that all of your OpenSSH eventually gets updated, because there's in the show notes, we'll link to the article that tells you which versions are affected. But yeah, don't worry about this. If someone does manage to pull this off, I want to hear about it, because this is one of those things where like they've proven that it's technically possible to do it, but practically it's not worth it. Although most hyperscale and consumer tech companies have promised to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030, the prospects aren't looking so hot right now because, well, AI has taken over every data center on the planet, and I'm not talking about the artificial intelligence itself. Google is the latest, reporting a 48% surge in greenhouse gas emissions over the last 5 years, making us wonder if they'll ever be able to reach zero. Despite vague claims that AI will allow us to tackle climate change and other world-shaking paradigm shifts, the industry's promises are starting to feel an awful lot like vaporware. Will we ever be able to reach net zero carbon emissions, or are we just finding new ways to consume all of those limited fossil fuels?
Well, it sure sounds like not good news, doesn't it? And that's because AI has really, really ramped up energy usage around the world. So, for comparison here, Google's own reports estimate that Google itself makes up 7 to 10% of all global data center electricity consumption. And Google's data center electricity consumption increased by 17% in 2023. Which means that this is Google alone is a not insignificant contributor to this problem. But of course, Google is not alone here. Let's be clear, I'm not criticizing Google specifically. It's this entire industry. Everything we've been talking about for the last year here on the rundown with regard to AI, the subtext has been basically eating up more and more and more and more electricity. In fact, analysts are suggesting that the US demand for electricity and the demand globally for electricity might actually exceed supply globally because only of AI-based electricity consumption. So let that sink in for a second. The entire supply of energy worldwide, if it grows at the rate that it's going in the data center space, could be basically tapped out by AI. Now, this is really bad news. And it's really bad news that companies like Google and Microsoft are probably not going to meet their 2030 net zero emissions challenges, because that makes up a not insignificant portion of global energy use. But there's a bright side here. And the bright side is not that AI is somehow going to solve climate change. Whenever I hear people talk about that, I cry, well, a word that we're not going to use here on the rundown because we want to avoid the explicit tag. The point is, AI is definitely going to draw more energy, and there's nothing that these companies are going to do to stop it, because to stop it would require them to get off the path of competition that they've all willingly gotten on. So what's the bright side? Well, there's a couple of them. First off, look at what Apple is doing with AI. They're not building massive power-sucking data centers to power this stuff. Now, yes, they are partnering with OpenAI, which uses a lot of energy from Microsoft, Oracle, and others to power ChatGPT. But most of Apple's AI is actually run on device, on battery power, and is not a significant consumer of energy, because Apple's not using it for training, they're using it for productive applications. And I think going forward, as the AI wave turns and crashes into the shore and starts to recede, what we're going to see is that the need for energy sucking training is going to be reduced somewhat as these models are put into production. And much of that production is going to happen locally on lower energy platforms. Look at companies like Grok, for example, who are able to do inferencing much, much more energy efficiently than the big GPU farms that you're envisioning here for AI. So I think that is actually going to help us somewhat stem this incredible rush to build more and more and more data centers full of power-sucking devices. Another thing that's going to help us is that the data center overall is becoming more efficient. Now, I know it's hard to see that, but if you look closely at these reports from Microsoft, Google, Amazon, others, you'll see that other aspects of the data center are actually increasing efficiency and using less power. And what that means, again, is that once we take our foot off the gas on GPUs, then everything else really, really will start to add up in terms of efficiency. But we're never going to be able to make up the use of GPU power just by making the rest of the data center more efficient. I think the third aspect that's going to really help us here is that if you look at the ramp for solar, you'll see that what they call in the industry the learning curve is actually phenomenally high. And what that means is that solar energy, solar electricity, photovoltaic cells are becoming so much cheaper, so much quicker in the last decade and beyond, that we could see a time when all the greedy capitalists out there are buying green energy and basically deploying net zero electricity simply because it's such a compelling purchase. Already, it's cheaper to buy and deploy an entire new solar plant complete with batteries and everything, the land, everything is cheaper to deploy new solar energy than it is to just continue to fire a natural gas powered electricity plant. And if that learning curve goes the way that it's been going in the past, that's going to be 50% cheaper next year and 50% cheaper than that the year after. And pretty soon, it's going to be essentially a no-brainer for companies to deploy massive, massive solar farms to offset the demand in energy. So I think that there is a possibility that we're going to actually meet net zero goals in certain industries, especially concentrated ones like data centers and AI. I think it is possible that we'll meet those, probably not by 2030, but probably shortly after that. And unfortunately, I don't think that we can give any credit to basically any of the companies that are making all this noise. I think what we can give credit to is just the way that technology tends to improve when there's demand for it. And that technology is improving whether they're asking for it or not. So despite the best efforts of the industry, it looks like power demand from AI might actually not destroy the entire planet. Nokia has agreed to purchase optical networking component company Infinera. This deal is valued at $2.3 billion and will see Nokia paying 70% of that in cash. Infinera makes optical components like lasers, transceivers, and more. The company has a substantial market share in the optical space, and in addition, Nokia is selling their Alcatel submarine networks business to the French government for $350 million. Tom, are these related, and what does this say about the industry?
I think that this is something that is directly related for a couple of reasons, Stephen. The first one is by saying that we're going to get rid of the submarine networking business, we're basically saying we don't want to operate these old school kind of connectivity things anymore. We're going to turn those over to organizations that honestly have a better vested interest in not only operating them, but more importantly, protecting them. As we've seen in the Bab al-Mandeb Strait for the last few months, the security of submarine cables is something that's paramount to world governments. I don't think Nokia has a private mercenary force that can sit out there on a boat and protect that submarine cable. But more importantly, Nokia is signaling that that's going away. And they're more focused on this optical revolution, if you want to call it that. That substantial market share that Infinera already enjoyed was something near 20% of the optical transceiver market. Anyone out there who's ever tried to install fiber connectivity knows what a big giant pain in the neck it is to get those transceivers, the SFP modules and everything like that. And a lot of companies farm those out to small manufacturers. Finisar is one that comes to mind from back in the day. You would actually see a Finisar optic with a branded logo on it. And so this is not the case for Infinera. They own everything top to bottom. So this makes Nokia an immediate player in the optical networking market. And I think what they're doing is they're saying we're going to start adjusting our spend in R&D to more closely align with the way that consumption is happening today. Not by providers of internet services, like the people who would operate submarine cables, but cloud providers, people who are building these giant data centers and running lots of optical networking because they need massive amounts of bandwidth. We're talking the 400 gig, 800 gig type of Ethernet. That doesn't run over copper, kids. That runs over fiber, and it runs over a lot of fibers. And so by being able to be aligned with these markets, they're basically saying to everyone out there, we are a credible player in the cloud networking space. That means that they're going to be able to provide these functions and this hardware to companies that are already purchasing it to build their own devices. So that would be your largest hyperscalers, your Amazons and your Facebooks. For the other companies that are looking to maybe buy into this, that would have only really been considering a company like, say, Arista as of late, they now have another option with Nokia. I think this is a strategy shift, and I think it's a smart one. Because overall, what it means is that Nokia is staying ahead of the curve and trying to reinvent themselves to be a company that is focused on providing solutions to where the money is being spent today. Whereas other companies who have a more tenuous investment in those areas, but are seen as giants in places like carrier routing, are loath to change because they haven't extracted all of the value out of that market line just yet. I think this is going to be a good thing for Nokia in the future. And I'm actually excited to see kind of if there's a lot of uptick in their sales to cloud providers with this Infinera acquisition. So time will tell. By the way, $2.3 billion for a company like Infinera, that's a steal. Why weren't they a more valuable company? I think it's because people are underestimating just how much the fiber market has room for growth. We focus a lot on the copper side of the house, especially in the campus network. But once you get into the data center, there's no electricity anywhere. It's all light. We had a story we wanted to take a closer look at, and it's one that we have spent a lot of time over the last several months, if not a couple of years, talking about, and it's the U.S. government's CHIPS Act, because now the government is worried that there might not be enough trained workers to fill the needs for all the jobs that are being created by the CHIPS Act. To that end, President Biden has announced a workforce partner alliance to ensure that the gap between skilled workers and those jobs will be closed as soon as possible. The way that it works is the WFPA is going to reward providers with grants that are between $500,000 and $2 million per project to train people for working in these new chip facilities. And the question that I have for you, Stephen, to kind of kick this discussion off is this something that we can count on to raise the average level of skills of our workers? Or are we going to fall into a trap like we did with companies like ITT Tech from back in the day?
Well, I don't want to speak about any particular school necessarily because I don't have a lot of insight into that. But I will say that we do have a pretty bad history here in the US of creating for profit education that leaves people high and dry. We've seen that again and again, especially in much hyped industries. I was just hearing a news story the other day about a bunch of people here in Ohio who received training from a for profit education institution to serve as technicians and installers for electric vehicle charging networks. And the graduates of those programs who had spent their hard-earned money and taken on debt in many cases in order to achieve these certificate programs and probably received decent training had no jobs. There simply weren't the jobs that they were promised. Now, with this case, I think we can confidently say that there are going to be the jobs. Here in Ohio, there's Intel is building the massive fab down in Columbus. I was just there last weekend and talking to some folks in the construction industry who reported that absolutely that progress is moving forward. That fab is heading in the right direction. But I think a lot of people are going to soon face the reality that even in a place like Columbus that has, wonderful education and a lot of, reasonably skilled workers, is going to face challenges hiring to fill a lot of the positions at those fabs. Now, some of those positions will be fairly easy to fill because they need a lot of electricians and plumbers and people like that Columbus and Arizona and Indiana and all these other places already have. But many of the positions in those are going to be much more specialized and frankly are going to require workers that the United States hasn't really focused on too much in the past. If you look at the people that work in semiconductor fabs in Taiwan and other places, many of those people are sort of assembly line workers. Essentially, they come in and they do tasks that require a reasonable amount of training and a lot of patience and a lot of commitment to repetitive tasks. Many of them as well are much more educated mathematics and physics and chemistry type employees. And there again, I think that the US has a long history of talking a lot about STEM, but not actually delivering on it. Ultimately, I look at this and I say that the plan here actually looks pretty sound. I actually read through the entire extremely long document from the NSTC and as well as the organization that's been created to make this happen. It's a company, sort of a private public partnership called NatCast. And I'm struck by the fact that it seems like these people's hearts really are in the right place. They're really trying to solve this problem in a way that reflects how the industry might be able to train workers. What I'm not seeing in there is a lot of detail about exactly what kinds of jobs and what kinds of training are going to be produced. And that's a big red flag to me because these fabs are going to be opening in just a few years. And if we're going to need to retrain people or train them for the first time to take those jobs, it seems to me that there should be a lot more detail about exactly what those jobs are, what training and skills those jobs require, and how we're going to get those training and skills out there. As it is, we have the opportunity, as you said, for a few companies, educational institutions, to get some federal grants to try to make this happen. And we certainly, like I said, have a reasonable effort from NatCast to try to support those people. But generally, eligibility for these programs is a little bit concerning because it would include for-profit educations. It would include non-accredited training providers. It would include, for example, unions, which is probably going to do a better job training workers. But it would also include unspecified other organizations, which who knows who they are. I hope that NatCast is ready to handle the inevitable flood of charlatans and idiots trying to apply for this funding, or even people with the best intentions might not be able to deliver on the need.
Oh, Stephen, your optimism is wonderful. There's no way that anybody would ever look at the possibility of getting $2 million and just decide to run with it, right? do we still get those ads teaching truck drivers and housewives that they should be applying for enterprise IT jobs because that's where the money is? We still do that, right? No, that's the thing, is that I'm worried that a lot of companies, these fly-by-night training organizations, are going to spring up to capture this money. And unfortunately, they're not going to be working closely enough to be able to ensure that these people are going to kind of get the jobs that they need. And this is a problem. I mean, shout out to my friend Greg Farrow, who brought this up, talking about the difference in the CHIPS Act and the way that things work with like TSMC. TSMC has a university that trains their employees, their future employees, in a degree for like things like electrical engineering and mathematics and that kind of stuff. Basically, it's like a job placement thing. You sign up and go to the university in Taiwan, and when you get out, you have a job waiting for you, because that's how they keep people going. That's how they keep things moving along. And we don't really enjoy those same kind of protections here in the US. Like, if you told me when I went to college that I had a guaranteed job waiting for me when I got out if I would just take this degree, my knee-jerk reaction is, yeah, well, what happens when the job guarantee goes away? Because we've seen so many radical shifts in the market over the last couple of decades that I don't know that having a hyper-specialized degree is going to pay off for me in the long run. And it's not like we haven't seen a problem with this in the past, where a company that sounds an awful lot like Fox agreed to build a factory in a state and then pulled out, or vastly changed the way that the factory was going to be built, because what they really wanted was a whole bunch of tax breaks. Like, we would never see that happen, right? There's no loopholes in our system that would allow a company to basically promise the world and then pull out at the last minute after we've already invested millions of dollars in training people to work in a factory that they'll never get a job in, right?
Well, I don't know if what's going to happen here, but I will say that it doesn't bode well for these fabs if they can't get workers, because no workers equals no production, and no production equals no return on the investment that the government and these companies are making. Certainly, the companies have a vested interest in making this thing happen, but I think there's a lot of clouds on this horizon. Certainly, some of the things you've mentioned are concerns. Another one of the concerns is just how much demand will there be for US-made semiconductors? Certainly the Department of Defense wants them, but does anyone else want them? I mean, who else is going to be buying these things? As I pointed out in previous rundown episodes, we also need things like chip packaging operations, which, yes, are starting to appear here in the US, as well as in other localized regional semiconductor efforts, for example, in Europe. But back to the education question, my biggest concern is that we could get a repeat of the huge scandal that came from the Lambda school. I don't know if you remember this, but essentially it was a coding boot camp that promised that you wouldn't have to pay unless you got a job. They promised incredible results. They had people dropping out of college in order to take their coding boot camp. Well, it was a giant fiasco, and there's been a lot of coverage of this, where basically all their promises went up in hot air. Very, very few people got jobs. Many people were left kind of high and dry by this thing. And I worry that we could see the same thing happening here with CHIPS Act jobs. And just like the electric vehicle charging thing that I mentioned earlier, that we could see new educational organizations or educational opportunities popping up, promising employees, hey, you want to work at that plant? We're going to train you in boot camp style. We're going to get it done real quick. We're going to have you ready to take that job. Is that training really going to be good? Is that job going to really be there? I'm really nervous about this. We don't have a good history, track record of actually converting on those kinds of promises here in the US. And the fact that they're giving out money to kickstart this thing, yeah, it's probably a good idea because they probably need it. But boy, I worry about whether it's actually going to work. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this here, of course, with the rundown, because it affects the entire industry. If this works, and like I said, it looks to me like the heart is in the right place here for the people involved in this. It looks to me like they're trying to do the right thing. If it works, it really is going to be an essential component, just as essential as the factory or the demand or the economic incentives. having employees to work in those things. But if it doesn't, boy, this is a huge scandal in the making.
We have to hope for the best, because that's the way that we grow as a country, as a technology giant in the world, and things like that. So I do hope that this pays off and that we have a lot of high paying jobs that are, skilled workers, that people are happy, that it allows us to kind of reassert ourselves as a leader in the space, and, makes life better for everybody else. You know what else makes life better for everything else? Is the events that we have coming up that people can tune in and watch and learn more about what we do here at Gestalt IT and Tech Field Day. The first one of those is actually coming up next week. Yeah, that's right. After Uncle Sam leaves me lots of fireworks for Independence Day, I'm going to fly out to California for Networking Field Day 35 and hear from companies like Arcus, CPacket, Hedgehog, Intel, Selector AI. If you want to head over to techfieldday.com, you can see the list of delegates who will be joining me, as well as the schedule for what we've got going on the 10th and 11th. And then after that, Stephen, I think you've got some more exciting stuff to share with us.
I don't know if it's exciting to everybody, but it's exciting to me. We're headed to the Share Conference. We're going to learn about mainframe technology, and we're going to bring a combination of people who are active in the mainframe space, as well as a lot of the people, friendly faces that you might know from the open systems and DevOps community, to learn and explore and figure out what's going on there. So we'll be covering that with Gestalt IT. We'll also be having Tech Field Day presentations there, and we're pretty excited about that. We've also put together our Q3 and Q4 Tech Field Day calendar now. We haven't announced every one of the events, but we are announcing most of them. And we're going to be back with Tech Field Day events focused on AI, AI data infrastructure, security, cloud, app dev. Yeah, we're going to be at KubeCon. All sorts of great topics. And after Networking Field Day, Tom, I bet that you're going to announce another Networking Field Day event.
You would be absolutely right. But if you want to learn more details about that, you need to stay tuned, because you never know when that announcement's going to pop out. But I'll tell you what you do know is that we're going to be here every Wednesday with the Gestalt IT Rundown. It's like regular as clockwork. We'll be publishing a new episode for you to consume, whether, I'm at Networking Field Day or somebody's on vacation. Don't worry about it. We've got a great list of co-hosts that will be jumping in to help us out. And don't forget that the easiest way to consume what we do is check out our website at gestaltit.com for show notes and for, the video. You can also just go directly to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/gestaltitvideo. Subscribe so you don't miss a new episode or any of the other great stuff that we upload, like that amazing unboxing video of that really cool camera that you just posted. Hint, hint, go check that out. And then if you want to check us out as a podcast, just look for the Gestalt IT Rundown in your favorite podcatcher and subscribe so that you'll get the episode uploaded to your running playlist as soon as possible. We'll be back next week. Well, at least Stephen will be back next week. I'll be at Networking Field Day, but Stephen and another co-host will be back with more great news. So everybody stay cool out there. Enjoy the holiday. Come back with 10 fingers and 10 toes, because that's the way we like our listeners. And until next week, see you soon.